I just finished a chat with Peter Karounos, and he is a strategist, he's a motivator, he's a leader, and he was instrumental in actually building Port Adelaide Football Club. So in 2012, he joined and he was part of creating their strategic vision, so helping them with their mission, their vision. When they were struggling, there was a huge change in the club, and basically he helped build their culture around changing their mission and their vision to actually help include the fan base more, and that was part of bringing the Never Tear Us Apart initiative and getting all the right people in the right roles. So he was a big part of that. He's also black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, so if you know anything about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, it is incredibly challenging to actually get a black belt in Jiu Jitsu. So for him, that is a big part of his life, and he just helps businesses, and he's in sport to actually help people to understand the crux of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and create really strategic planning to help them get to where they want to go. So in this conversation, we tied a lot into tennis. My goal was actually to extract a lot of his knowledge and bring it into a tennis context so that we can actually understand at an individual level, at a team level, at a business level, how can we make strategic changes that are going to be beneficial. So we just finished that conversation and was extremely locked in. I feel like we got some extremely good practical things from this chat, and definitely something to listen to if you're wanting some sort of transformative change to go to the next level, because he's talking on a very high level. He's done it, and he's helped businesses and helped Port Adelaide achieve and get to the highest level and be around the mark in the last 10 years. So strap yourself in for this one for sure, and there is a lot of golden nuggets, and really keen to hear some feedback from anyone that listened today. Peter Karounos, welcome, my friend.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Anytime. I'm very keen to pick your brain today and see how we can get your strategic mind working into a tennis space, and look into the psychological side of what goes on to make a high performance athlete.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
So you were a big part of Port Adelaide Football Club's rebranding, rejuvenation, in around 2012 when the club was struggling a bit. The stands were empty, and there was definitely some conflict within the club, and then the fan base were definitely disheartened by what was going on. So talk to us a little bit about how you got into work with the strategic side of Port Adelaide Football Club, and what you actually did at that club to help rebuild it into the strong culture that it has today.
Well done, Luke. You've done your research, mate. Very, very good. Are you a Port supporter?
I'll just get this up here. Yeah. I am actually a Crows supporter.
You're a Crows,
but I admire the way Port go about it, and how passionate and how strong the culture is at the club. I have respect for it, but since I was young, I've always been a Crows man. So we're doing it tough, but can't leave.
It's all good as long as one of our teams in our state is doing well. That's the view that I've got. But when you go to games?
I used to. Mm-hmm. I used to. So probably when I was 20, 21, I used to go with my mates a bit. Yeah. Probably haven't in the last 6-7 years. Yeah. But follow the footy culture and definitely feel the difference from the outside around the culture of the fans between Crows and Port, for sure. So
do you notice the difference on game day from a Crows game versus a Port game, the supporters?
Definitely a bit more tame, the Crows fan base. Port, there's definitely a lot more life. They're passionate, but also when things aren't going well, they'll also let you know about it too, in both ways.
Indeed. General questions, but I'll come back to that, because there's something that sits behind that, which was part of the intent that that the club had in 2012, really, which was to say, how do we maximise the impact moving to Adelaide Oval? That was a big piece.
So when actually was that moved to Adelaide
Oval? 2014.
Okay.
2014, yep. I think.
How long in advance did you know that was happening?
About 2 years.
Okay.
About 2 years. So, but I might come back and start at the beginning, because let's get this a bit closer. Yep. Yeah. So the story starts with. Before I started at Port Adelaide, I had a career in working in leadership, strategy, culture change. I was travelling overseas for about 5 or 6 years there. Almost felt like once a month, running week-long residential leadership programs with mining, oil and gas companies. And after doing a lot of travel, you felt like, yes, it was good being overseas and seeing some amazing parts of the world, but you started to feel like you're becoming a bit of an industrial tourist. And so I started missing birthdays and holidays and family events. And I said, look, I really wanted to consolidate working at home more, Adelaide, but also working in a space that I was really passionate about, which is sport. I played football growing up in my career, and so I said logically it makes sense that the two big teams in our state, I sent them an email, and I actually sent Port Adelaide and Adelaide Crows a very similar email. I changed the details just a little bit, but I referenced, it was a pretty direct email, Luke. I basically said exactly what you just said about the context and where the club was at, membership numbers, attendance rates at games, performance on the ladder, all those sorts of things. And Port Adelaide were kind and open enough and courageous enough to say, come and have a chat. And at the time, Peter Road said to come and have a conversation, and then I met and got connected with the then Chief Executive Officer, Keith Thomas. And to Keith's credit, it started with one conversation that led to a whole bunch of work that we'll dive into and talk about, what came from there. But yeah, that was the starting point. It started with a cold email, a very direct one, which Port Adelaide could equally have said, no thanks, we're okay. But to their credit, they said, come and have a conversation. Because I think they realised that at that time, 2012, as you rightly said, there had been a lot of challenges, and they were really keen to think big, innovate, do some things differently. Talking about the game day experience, which we'll talk about as well, was part of that thinking. So I felt very fortunate to have that opportunity to go and speak to them. But that's how it started. And then I can go and talk about what we actually did as well.
But
please
do.
Yeah, you want to just keep going with it?
Yeah,
so
keep rolling.
Yeah, so the starting point was, when having that conversation with Keith, and he mapped out what his vision for the club was. And the real centerpiece was, obviously there was things around, there was a lot of changes that were made at that point in time as well. So David Koch had recently come in as the chairman. You have a new coach in Ken Hinkley. Travis Boak was just made captain. Now you've got a new CEO in Keith Thomas. So there was that real deliberate effort to get the leadership spine of the club sorted, from the very top to on field. And then that was a clear vision. But then it was about knowing that Adelaide Oval was where Adelaide Crows and Port Adelaide Football Club were going to arrive. There was a very strong focus on saying, we want to make a bigger impact. We want to have a great impact for our members, for our supporters, for our corporates, for our players, for our team. And that was a very clear focus, but they absolutely wanted to have a bigger impact than the Crows, right? So it was like, we've got to hit this as hard as we possibly can. And so the work was really then starting to work with the executive team to begin with. So that started with a session with Keith and his executive managers, and we started just mapping out a roadmap on what the vision is. So we talked to Port Adelaide Football Club about their mission and their vision, and then what that would start to look like as we start to cascade that out, and then doing departmental plans and a whole bunch of work that started. But fundamentally, it started with a conversation around what success looks like, sounds like, and feels like long term, ultimately, but also more immediately in terms of arriving at Adelaide Oval. So there was a lot of work that went into it, Luke, but it started with just an openness to have the conversation about what success is going to look like, and some wonderful extra stories that I can go on, but I might give you a break if you've got some questions that you might want to dive into.
I'm always, when it comes to the pods, just trying to soak it all in. But again, in this conversation, I want to keep linking back to tennis as much as we possibly can. But just hearing you talk about the leadership spine gets me thinking about, obviously tennis being an individual sport, but
the team that you do have around you, getting the right coach, making sure that the parents are on board with the right messaging and the right intentions, having the right maybe physical trainer, the right training environment, really goes a long way to actually helping the athlete succeed in the long term if you just place all of the right people and environments for them to thrive in. Really, you can't control exactly what action's taken, but you can help facilitate better intention, better action. So just listening to what you're saying, it makes sense that from the core, if you get that right at Port Adelaide, you can see where that leads, not so immediately, but over the course of a few years, how that actually leads to more success, better culture, bigger fan base, better results in general. Port have done very well, still chasing that elusive premiership, which they're very hungry for, but they've consistently been around the mark for quite a long time after some hardship in the early phases of that change.
Yeah, look, it's not in the world that I've worked in for the last 25 years, in, like I said, leadership, strategy, culture change, and high performance, on field and off field, with businesses and with athletes. There's very common traits and characteristics. I was lucky enough to meet a board member from Richmond Football Club when we were rolling out a safety leadership program for SA Power Networks. So we rolled a safety leadership program across 2,500 people at SA Power Networks, and it was a wonderful program that we created. It was a 3-day program, and we would invite keynote speakers. So we would facilitate different bits and pieces, but we would invite keynote guest speakers from a range of different areas, from the guy who started up Top Gun Academy in the United States. We had Dr. Richard Harris, who saved the kids from the Thailand caves, came along as well. And we had a guy called Emmett Dunn, who was headed up the police force during a period of time in Victoria. We implemented a range of different initiatives to move away from the use of batons and move towards OC spray, capsicum spray.
Oh, yeah.
But he was also on the board of Richmond.
Okay.
And he shared the story of what led to Richmond's success in that recent period that they had success. And it was fascinating. And he said, look, there was a recognition that the club needed to do things differently. Like, they had been going for a long period, very proud club, and needed to do things differently. And some of the things that they did was they actually got a review done by a big consulting firm. I can't remember one of the big brands, but this consulting firm came in and gave them a number of recommendations. Now, that takes a bit of courage for the board to open themselves up to be exposed to getting some of those recommendations. But some of them was that the head coach needed to get some professional development in this space, leadership. So they sent him to Harvard at the time. And then they employed a number of psychologists in different parts of the business club to help prop up the club and set it up for success. So I think they had like 6 psychologists, whether it's just like a sport, psychologist, welfare. And their role was to help support the players in every way possible to get to that picture of success. So if I link that back to Port Adelaide and what Port Adelaide started to do and has doing and it's continuing to do, it's that environment. It's getting the structure right within your team, making sure the roles are clear, providing the right environment, having the right people, the right resources around you. And if I link that back to tennis, it's the same principle, right? Like, I look at a tennis player, I look at a coach of a club, and it's the same blueprint, really. It's about saying, well, what's the nucleus within those examples? So it's the tennis player is the nucleus, at the club, the coach is, and then you say, how do you build those bits and pieces around them to prop them up, to give them the support that they need? How do you develop their leadership as well? So from a player point of view, they don't have to be the ultimate leader, but developing leadership skills in them is critical, so that when they are on court, they've got the skills to be able to solve problems for themselves as well, which comes in leadership. So they're all transferable skills, Luke, that I see. I know they're different disciplines, but they're very similar. Yeah.
What sort of things do you help to actually help athletes build leadership? So even just in a football space, which you've been majority involved in, how do you actually help them build leadership? What sort of things do you do to help them solve problems for themselves that could be translated to a tennis point of view as well.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I'll typically do I want to understand a bit about the context. So, well, firstly, the person that I'm working with, but also their context. So I want to understand things like personality, what drives them, what's their picture of success, what do they believe about their vision for success, do they believe they can do it, do they believe they can't, what are their values, what's important to them. So we're really starting with the individual and who they are and what their context is. And then, if you can imagine, I don't have a visual here, but then I almost mind map it and go, let's go in circles outside of that person. What's the next layer around that person? So if it's an athlete, the next layer I'm wanting to understand is the family structure. So what's the family structures like? Are the support networks good? Do they need some support? 'Cause sometimes parents are very willing to support, but sometimes they can try and play too many roles and play the role of parent and coach and this and that. And perhaps they can, or sometimes it's better to provide that support from someone else. And then we look at the other support structures around coaches and then equipment and resources and other metrics. So what I'm really doing is I'm thinking about and working with them about whole of strategy, not just on court strategy, but whole of life strategy. Because if all of that it's all working together, right? Like it's all, we call it in the world that I work in, we call it systems thinking, where the idea is that if all of these parts are part of the same system, if you affect one part of the system, it's going to affect another part of the system, right? So if you change your diet, it's going to impact your energy levels, right? Basic example, yeah. But so I'm looking at it in that way. So I'm starting with the nucleus and building out the map around that, and then the strategy, and then working with them, but not trying to overwhelm them, by getting them to think about that. That's my role. Yeah. Is to help them just to focus on the core bit.
The low-hanging fruit as well, like the important part to take action on right now, and then there's obviously stages and phases.
100%, but we're always coming back to that and looking at saying, what do we need to tweak here? What's working? My role is not to be the technical expert. That's where there's technical tennis coaches who can talk about, what the backhand needs to look like technically and all that sort of stuff, but certainly working with them about how that technical coach is communicating to them as well, right? Is that coach communicating in a way that makes sense to this individual, their personality? Maybe they're an introvert and the coach is an extrovert, and the coach is doing their thinking as they speak, but if the player is an introvert, they might need some time to process what the coach is saying, and they can't actually necessarily verbalize it themselves. So a coach's understanding of their players' personality type is critical as well in how to get that communication right, because it matters.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's what a lot of coaches don't do well. There may be amazing technical coaches and knowledge of the game is very good, but their ability to understand the human and communicate and change your communication style based on the individual in front of you is where I think you're going to have your greatest wins, and you can learn about the technical side and you can really develop your knowledge and improve. But that other side there is something that is maybe a little bit harder to teach, and you can do a lot more research and figure out how to go down that path. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into talking about the different personalities and how that relates to how you might communicate to them differently, how you might actually coach a certain style differently depending on what sort of psychological or characteristic traits that someone might have.
Yeah, and there's so many tools out there around understanding personality. And I'm probably going to just talk about the one that I've worked with most over the years, and I think it's the one that's been around for the longest. It's called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Look, with all these personality instruments, if you go online, there's always going to be critiques about the validity or the reliability of these things. But I think because I've been working with it for the last number of years, I see it play out time and time again. And so I say it's absolutely valid and reliable from my experience in what I'm seeing in my interactions with people. But yeah, so the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator really talks about personality preferences. This is video recorded too, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a cool one that your viewers might want to play with. So it talks about personality preferences. If you look at the difference between personality versus preferences, so personality is defined as your reputation It's how you are seen to be by other people, but it's not always indicative of your preferences in terms of personality preferences. For example, you might be seen as extroverted in your personality. So people see you as that outgoing, sociable person, but your preferences might be introverted. In other words, you get your energy from being away from people. It's just that when you are with people, you tend to be outgoing in your personality. So we're talking about really two different constructs, whereas personality is your reputation and preferences is a little bit deeper. What I'm going to talk about is preferences.
Perfect.
So can I get you to do it in a little exercise? You can both do it if you really want to.
Please.
Put your arms by your side. All right. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to get you to fold your arms. So on the count of 3, I'm just going to get you to fold your arms. So 1, 2, 3. Great. And if you just notice, just keep it where you are. Just notice which hand is on which bicep or which forearm is ahead of the other forearm. So you've got your left in front of your right and you've got your right hand on your left bicep. So don't move it just for a moment. How does it feel?
Feels comfortable.
Comfortable? Did you have to think about it?
No.
It was just natural, right? And so we call that a preference. You've got a natural preference for folding your arms. So just remember the way you've got it. Now put your arms to the side. And on the count of 3, I'm going to get you to do it the opposite way. Okay, so 1, 2, 3.
No, that's yuck, man. That's yuck. That ain't it.
How does it feel?
Nah, it's not natural.
It's not natural. It doesn't feel right. You had to think about it. I like that you're still trying to fix it up. And you can go back to normal. And when I just keep talking, sometimes I notice people will go back to the normal way of doing it because it's natural, right? And so when we're talking about preferences, what we're talking about is exactly that, what you just did with your folding of your arms, but in relation to your personality. So each of us have got our natural preferences, for example, around how we get our energy. Some people get their energy from being around people. We call them extrovert. And some people get their energy from being away from people, and we call them introverted. And they talk very, very differently. They communicate very differently. An extroverted person like myself do their thinking as they talk. So we verbalize things, and as we're talking, our thoughts come to us. Versus the introvert who will need some time and space to reflect on what they're really thinking before they verbalize it. So for a coach and a player, it's really critical to understand these differences, because a misunderstanding of that can lead to not getting the key critical message that leads to high performance through. It may also lead to conflict, because the player says, they're getting frustrated. They don't know why they're getting frustrated, but they're getting frustrated, or the coach is getting frustrated because there's this gap in understanding between the way that they're talking about is fundamentally different. So you've got extrovert and introvert in terms of where you get your energy from. And then you've got what we call sensing and intuition. So people who are sensing preference are more in the present moment. They're focused on the facts and the details. They're not so worried about other things. Whereas people who are intuitive are worried about the future, not so much the present. They're thinking about strategy, big picture, concepts, abstract ideas. Again, that's fundamentally different. So I might be a coach, coaching as an intuitive. So I'm an intuitive coach, but my player might be very much a sensing person. So
it's a lot more fact-driven.
Yeah. Like I might be talking in generalities about the game or their performance and so on, whereas the player, being very factual and practical, just says, I don't understand what you're trying to tell. Like, where in the game are you talking about? What position on the court do you mean? And so on. Whereas the coach, if they're not...
So you've got to provide specifics. Detail.
100%, right? And that's what they need. And whereas the benefit of the intuitive coach might be able to see patterns in a game. I'd say, did you notice in third set, you had the same pattern as in the first set, where you started to get tired around the fourth game, or game 4 all, whatever it might be. The coach an intuitive coach will pick that up, but the practical player might not appreciate some of those. And again, right? So how we're talking to each other, there's 4. I'll go through the all 4, and then you can deep dive from there.
Please do.
And then you've got what we call thinking or feeling. So this is about how we make decisions. So some of us make decisions based on how we think about things, and others make decisions based on how we feel about things. A really fun example that I share in workshops that I run is to help people understand where they sit with this stuff is, if you imagine that your partner, you're going to an event with your partner or your friend or your best friend, and you're getting ready, and then you hear this knock on the door, and then you open the door and you see what your partner and your friend is standing on the other side of the door, and you see what they're wearing, and then you think to yourself, oh no, are they really going to wear that? How you respond to that situation tells you a bit about whether you are thinking or feeling based in your preferences. Someone who's thinking will say, what are you wearing? That's inappropriate. Whereas someone who's feeling might be a bit more indirect, and they go, are you feeling comfortable in what you're wearing there? So how we communicate is critical, right? If I'm dealing with a player who is feeling preference, like they're very sensitive about getting feedback, but let's say I'm a thinking based coach and I'm very direct, I might say something inadvertently to that player, and without even knowing it, get them offside. So I've demotivated them in a moment of giving them some critical feedback. Now you double that up by if they're an introverted feeling preference player, then all of a sudden I might not even know that I've affected them because they internalize it. And so I'm sitting there and time can go by, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there going, why am I not getting through to this player? And it might be because of something that I said months ago, that hasn't been resolved or communicated. So again, these differences, make an impact in terms of that high performance space being in that zone of effective communication. And then the last one is what we call judging or perceiving, and that's really just about how you move through life. Some of us are very structured and organised and orderly. Now, if I look at your diary, if you've got everything organised in a day and colour-coded appointments, then you're very structured. We call that judging. Whereas if you've got nothing in your diary and you just like to go with the flow, then we call that perceiving. And that affects things like going to a tournament, a major tournament like the Australian Open or whatever it might be. Some players will really, really want everything to be mapped out in absolute detail. Others who are more go with the flow might say, yes, I know I need that, but I need some flex as well, because if everything's too structured for me, it's going to stress me out. I need some downtime, a time away from all those commitments to re-energize. And so, sorry, Luke, I know that was a long piece there just to get through that, but that's like really critical stuff, right? Not knowing these nuances. And a coach doesn't have to know that, but at least having a support, like myself or someone who understands that within the team to look at these little details, and they can be the critical factors of success or not success.
For sure. I think it's really valuable what you're saying. I think a lot of people get a lot clearer on their message as a coach if you can actually dive into these areas and understand the individual that you're working with, because I think we've all been guilty of coaching in a cookie cutter way based on our knowledge and what our personal preferences are, rather than actually tailoring to the person in front of us. That's essentially what we want to be striving for if we want to actually have deeper connections and more success and help the athlete towards where they want to go. And it's something that I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. In my coaching, I'm getting a lot more I've always been this way inclined, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into really understanding the person at their core so that I can coach and communicate in a way and help them find a playing style that's going to be really conducive to their values and to their preferences, like you're saying. For example, I've got one boy, he's just finished year 12 and now he's getting really keen to play and go over and head to college. And I've worked with him for a long time. We've had a bit of a break and it's been a good opportunity to reset. And he's a type of player and type of person that he's very disciplined, he's very focused, he's very professional, but and he's a very good athlete. So he's very fit and he's very quick, but he's not a big ball striker, he's not a big athlete, but he has a great engine, and I think he's very, very disciplined. But the way he's always played has almost been like he doesn't believe at his core that that's enough and that's the right way to play. And it's been about, I need to do more. I'm almost like not enough. I need to actually play bigger and hit bigger and do more with the ball, rather than just like owning the fact that he's a very disciplined person and just leaning into that. Like I'm fitter. I'm mentally more focused. I can just last longer and just grind people and work people into the ground a little bit more, and just trying to get him to see the value in that's actually a beautiful gift too. Rather, it's not less than because you're not a huge ball striker like maybe some of these other boys that are heading towards 17, 18 that have a huge serve, big forehand. Like you got to work with what your skills are and own that and really connect and play in that way. So it's like, that's one clear example. So I'm keen to kind of like keep talking about this and link it back into like a direct play style. So then I think as a coach, it becomes so much more clearer on what sort of sessions you run, because you're just removing all other stuff that is still maybe important, but it's not necessarily very important for the type of player that you're working with. You can actually focus a lot more on something that's going to be a lot more value to someone like this athlete that I was speaking about.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a little saying that I use in the leadership programs that I do, Luke. It's when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so sometimes our habits of how we've always done things drive doing more of the same. And yeah, sometimes in some areas that's appropriate. So, you know, I'm looking at a player's game saying exactly what you're saying. There's some key strengths and you nurture them. You go deeper in those strengths. You say, well, you know, you've got a strength in grinding. Let's keep working with that. But then you look at the whole product and say, okay, are there some things that we do need to bring into the game? But you've got to assess them. You can't just, you don't have to necessarily go off and do that. You've got to research it and explore it. And so that's part of the discipline that, for me, that you talk about too. You know, you'll do an intro for me, but there's a bit, I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is that there's about 800 moves in Jiu Jitsu, and there are about 20 that you use more often than not. But our bodies are different. So some of the moves that will work for me in my body type, in my structure, are going to be different to the ones that work for you. One of my coaches, we've got a move in Jiu Jitsu called triangle choke. I don't know if you're familiar with the triangle choke. Yeah, so one of my coaches can't even, he's a black belt, like third or fourth degree, can't even lock it on. He says that. He goes, but he makes adjustments based on his body type. And so I love what you were just sharing about the player that you're working with and saying, we've got to contextualize it. You don't have to necessarily do what that other player does, but what is within you that we accentuate, that we bring in as new things. And that's a constant process of reconciling it in terms of what works, what doesn't, and so on. But that's part of it. You know, you asked the question before, in what way do you work with players? It's working with coaches. Now, I won't understand that at a technical level like you do, but you and I can have that conversation, for example, with a player, and you can say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? How do we communicate that to the player? How do we get them to open their mind up to entertain that? Because that can be threatening. When you're 19, 20, 21 and you've got a certain game and that's got you to a point, let's say that's got you to number X in the world, you're 100 in the world or 200 in the world or whatever, to then make a gross change can be threatening. It's like, well, if I change this, am I going to go backwards? Back to 200, and can I recoup that if I change my game? But sometimes that's required, and there's a way to do that effectively from a strategic point of view too. So these are the bits, right? These are the cement between the bricks that I talk about, you know, getting that right.
It is that communication to get the athlete and the team to see the value in why the change is going to be beneficial, and you may not see the result straight away, but in the big picture, it's actually going to be the right move, because you're already seeing that with the current model, the current system, there's limitations to how much growth is available, and you can see the stagnation already starting to form. Yep.
Yeah. And like, it's, you use the arm folding activity that we used before. If I say to you, hey, Luke, folding your arms the opposite way is going to help you to achieve greater success in life. And you go, yeah, but it feels uncomfortable. I just want to fold my arms the way that I'm used to. I'm saying, well, you can, and that will help you get a level of success. But if you know, we have to look at the other way, and that's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable to begin with, but you need that support to help navigate that change as well. So yeah, a lot of it is, you know, there's the technical changes that need to be made, but it's also nurturing that person through the change by focusing on their beliefs, their values, their personality, you know, talking to them in a way that matches their personality preferences, understanding the systemic changes that are going to be made in other areas, and looking at how all that sort of works, like a bit of like a clock, the bits behind a clock, all the pieces, and you change that. That's sort of the piece, I reckon, Luke, that's really, really important. And then there's little basic techniques, you know, that come into it from a gameplay point of view as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, you got me thinking, definitely, is this test accessible? Anybody can just do it online?
There's an accredited version. that's available through different like there's an official version, but there's also a web version that people can go in and it's pretty accurate, I found. So if for the viewers and listeners, there's a website called 16 Personalities. So it's just the number 1, the number 6, 16 spaced personalities. If you type that into Google search, that'll bring it up and you can do the test on there. It's about 15-20 minutes. It's really easy. That'll give you a feedback on what your results are. Also important to remember though that that's just an indicator of your personality type. The proper administration process requires you to do what we call a self-estimate, where you estimate what you think you are. Then you do the assessment and that gives you the result. And so that's interesting because your assessment might be different to what your prediction is, which is not a bad thing. It just means that you've got lack of clarity in an area and we just need to get you further to understand what your actual preferences are.
That would be quite helpful.
Yeah, and that's why having a practitioner help guide you through that is really important, to help you ask questions to help you navigate. But the beautiful thing about that tool is it's unlike other questionnaires which say, here's your results, this is who you are. You ultimately decide where you sit. And so if you predict what you think you are, which is one type, and then you do the questionnaire and it's a different type, and you look at both of those and say, I'm neither of them, but I think I'm this, then that's what you go with.
Okay.
So I like the freedom in that, and it doesn't put you in a box. It just helps you to understand yourself a little bit better.
So how does it work with the actual official version? So what's the cost involved? Like what's the process?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want this to sound like it's a pitch from me because I've actually moved away from doing the official one so much. But there's the questionnaire itself, the basic questionnaire is about 60, 70 bucks to do. And then you'd need an accredited practitioner of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, someone who's gone through the actual course who can actually do that, to take you through that, and they would have their own rates and things like that. But
are you one of those?
I'm an accredited practitioner. Okay. Yes, as well. So
I could come to you if I had a player.
Yeah. If you want to, if you want to do the official version, $60. There's no margin on that. I don't put that on there. But and oftentimes, Luke, it's just one of those things that I throw into the coaching bit that I am doing anyway, just to help people understand. But that's why I say if you want to do the free version online, that'll still give you some information. At the end of the day, whether you get the accredited, the official, or the online one, you're going to get some value from it because you are starting to look within and understand yourself at a deeper level. And I think that's the real benefit, right? We don't need coaches to be experts in Myers-Briggs type indicator. Yeah. We're just asking them to appreciate this. They don't even have to do it necessarily. If they've got support structures around them, which is what we talked about earlier, then that's cool. But to at least appreciate that this stuff exists and it impacts the player's performance, and the coach's performance too.
100%. It's so interesting to talk about just you saying you get benefit out of just looking within, because what I see in the tennis world is a lot of resistance to that. Probably not just the tennis world, a lot of people in general are a little bit resistant to looking within and having more self-inquiry, more curiosity around your habitual patterns and why you are who you are, your past behaviours, some patterns that you have. What's your experience around that? Why do you think so many people are maybe not as willing to look within? And then why would you suggest to someone to look within? If someone's challenging you, go, well, no, I'm not interested. From an athlete point of view, tennis point of view, why would you suggest that it's actually something that they should consider?
All right, that's an awesome question, Luke. There's so many ways that I can go about this. I'm going to say that there's two reasons. I'm going to say that there's pain involved in doing that. And I'm going to say it's invisible. My mentor, I remember saying to me when, early days, he said, Pete, the two hardest things to sell in business are insurance, because you're selling something that hasn't happened yet, and also leadership or personal development programs. Because how does someone know that when they go to a leadership program that they're going to be better? How do you prove that? So you're going to go to a 3-day or 5-day Tony Robbins event. You'll feel great, but have you changed? How do you know? Is it affecting your performance in any way? Now, that's invisible, right? Like you and I would agree. Yes, you go along to something like that, and of course you're going to get benefit out of it. And we can see that the evidence is in those that have done it previously, who have engaged in self-development, businesses or individuals or teams, there's a relationship, there's a correlation between their performance and having done some form or it being part of the way that they do things, self-reflection and continuous improvement and getting better, right? So there's our evidence there. And there's other evidence as well, scientifically, but anecdotally, that's our evidence. So if we can just take a leap of faith on that one and go, look, I know because I see it in other spaces that this stuff is going to work. It might not work straight away, but with continuous application, it will work. I've seen it work for other people, so I'm going to take a leap of faith with that stuff. And you can put some metrics around it as well. Like we can do behavior-based assessment programs where I can say, all right, Luke, I'm going to, as the expert, I'm going to assess you on the extent to which your beliefs align with high performance. And we might do that quarterly or annually or at the end of a tournament. We can unpack that and go, did you believe? And we can put some metrics around it, but that's somewhat subjective as well. But there's the leap of faith. And the other part of it is the pain part that I talked about before, is just understanding how habits are created and recreated. And so if you can understand that it's like it's like everything else. Like if you're going to do a physical program, there's going to be some pain involved in that. You're going to do squats or bicep curls, there's pain, but you get the benefit at the end of that. It's just a different type of pain because it's internal. So if we can break through that and say, look, this is for my benefit. Yes, it's going to be a little bit challenging. I'm going to be confronted with some things that I might not want to look at or talk about, but in that is the benefit. There's that little saying, Luke, the night is darkest before the dawn. And I often like to use that as a way of relating that back to pain in a way and saying, look, I know it's tough now, but there's going to be benefit at the other end of it. So yeah, I know it's a little bit obscure. I'm an intuitive on the Myers-Briggs, mate. So I'm talking.
No, I'm right there with you, mate. So I'm not sure if the audience is catching on, but I'm right on that wavelength, Adore. Hopefully some people can take away and see the value and follow along for the ride. So through your work, you've created and trademarked what's called the Success Map.
Yeah.
Now, that talks a lot about strategy and tying into everything we're talking about with your values, your belief system, how that then relates into your vision and your mission, and how that creates a strategic framework for businesses and for people to have a structure to be successful in their work environment, for example. And that's what you did with the Port Adelaide Football Club. So how can we take that and bring it to a tennis player to talk about, at its core, what is my mission? What is my vision? How do I actually have strategic planning around what I'm doing on the tennis court and what action I take off the court and how that relates to the schedule, my year, and all of the things that are involved in being a tennis player?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Thanks for referencing that, because that's really been a centerpiece around in the workspace, or it's really life as well, but that's like the starting point. We actually talked about that with Port Adelaide Football Club when we started. It was a very it was in its original form, it was a little bit different, and my mentor used a version of that. I felt that there were some pieces that needed to be added to it, so I've evolved that as well. But there's really 3 steps, Luke, that I look at. And this is available on my website as well, so if anyone goes to on my website, www.peterkarounos.com, my success map will be on there. There's really three things. Step number 1, which you talked about, is being absolutely clear on what your direction is. So those things, the 2 things within there is, what's my vision? Well, I call it intention. So at any level, if I'm going into a game or a tournament or tennis generally, what's my intention? What do I want to achieve here? What does success look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Can I articulate it? If I can't articulate it, there's work to be done there, right? Because that says that I haven't got a real clear picture in my mind about what that looks like. But the work is, say it as much as you possibly can, write it down as much as you possibly can until it becomes so clear that you are locked in to where you're going. And that's the work around the vision or the intention. And then bringing it back and asking yourself, well, what's your purpose in this space as well? Or mission, purpose, mission. I use those words interchangeably as well. And say, well, are you clear on what your role is here? Are you clear what your support structure roles are? So have we got a clear sense of direction in where we're going? Step number 1. Step number 2 is we need a strategy then. It's like saying, okay, I want to head to Melbourne. but how am I going to do it? I've got a clear direction in where I'm heading, but how am I going to do it? Am I going to fly? Am I going to drive? So from a tennis point of view, it's saying, what's your strategy? What are the things that you need to put in place? What about the fitness program, nutrition, psychological, what are the strategies you're going to put in place? And then how are you connected to that strategy in terms of what you believe? Do you believe that strategy is going to get you to where you need to get to or not? And what work do you need to do in your beliefs? Do you value it? Like, why is it important to you? Have you reconciled that? Because there's going to be moments along the journey that you're going to have questions about why you're doing what you're doing. And so if you've got a clear sense of what your values are, then you always come back to that and revisit them and go, right, I now remember why I'm on this journey. And I'll re-energize myself by having a clear sense of values. You talked about personality preferences already and understanding that stuff. There's this world of abilities, knowing that along the journey I'm going to be either able or unable to do some things and willing or unwilling. And depending on where I sit in that ability, willingness equation will determine what support I need to get from someone. And so that strategy piece encompasses all of that, right? So that's the work that we've got to do with a coach or with a player. And then the last part of that is, I call it the journey, but it's really about change. So it's saying what are the changes along the journey that we can maybe anticipate and start putting a plan in place for those known changes. But if there are unknown changes that we know are going to happen anyway, what is the agreement that we're going to have about how we navigate those changes when they do come, right? So some of those, you might go into a tournament and go, all right, I think we're going to win game number 1, so we can bank on winning that, and all of a sudden you're 2 sets and a half to down.
Yeah.
Well, there's a change, so we haven't anticipated that, and so I would be saying, don't wait until that moment comes. Let's have a chat about it. So I say to you, Luke, what happens? You should win game 1 of the Open or whatever it is that you're playing. But what happens if you're 2 sets to love down? What's our plan? Well, how are we going to manage that risk? And so we have a conversation with that. So it's not, you don't get to that point and go, now what? You've thought about it. You've planned for it. So they're the 3 bits, right? Direction, strategy, and change. And that's the consistent bits that I've seen over the time with businesses, with teams, and with individuals and athletes as well. And that was, going back to Port Adelaide, the original story, that was exactly what we did with them. We said, what's your mission? Yep. What's your vision? Then we went into the strategy. So some parts of their business, of their club, had plans. Some didn't have plans, like documented plans. Of those that did have plans, they look very different. Some had very detailed plans, others didn't. So a lot of the work then was just saying, right, we've got to actually extract all this stuff and have some consistency here about what those plans look like, who's doing what are the roles, membership, you're doing this, great. Media, you're working on that, cool. Corporate, you're doing that, great. Getting those parts talking to each other so that you're not duplicating or triplicating efforts. Yep. And then just helping that team navigate the change then by giving them things like leadership development, personal development, so that they've got the capability to manage that as well. So we used to do, funnily enough, we did a number of sessions at Tennis SA, 2-day sessions with each different department, giving them leadership skills, training, communication, personality training on the Myers. But we did all of that stuff with them. And that was really heavy in that first 2 years. Like, I've worked with them over the last 10 years, but in those first 2 years was so heavy doing all of that work, because there's a recognition that if we do that right, then we are going to land at Adelaide Oval having a bigger impact than the Adelaide Crows. And they did, never tear us apart.
Are you saying you did this with Port or Tennis SA?
So we did this with Port Adelaide Football Club.
Yeah.
And we did sessions at Tennis SA. So in that building.
Oh,
so
okay.
It was
With Port Adelaide.
With
You didn't
Port
actually
Adelaide.
do it with Tennis
No,
SA.
sorry.
No,
We did
I'm with you.
Good point. Yeah, good clarification. No, we did it with Port Adelaide Football Club, but they used to have, in the early days, I'm not sure if you remember, they used to be have a sort of an office space there that they shared at Tennis SA, which was cool. It was right next door to Adelaide Oval. I mean, that was a little example, right? So basing themselves right where they were going to be come 2014 was part of, thinking as well. It was really cool sort of experience. And sorry, just quickly before I lose the thought, because I was meaning to mention it before, but that Never Tear Us Apart came from a conversation internally about how do we have a better game day experience than the Adelaide Crows, And at the time, the events general manager there was doing, as I understand it, was doing a lot of research, understanding what different codes are doing, like NBA, soccer, soccer leagues, and what do they do. I understand that they actually went to Liverpool. The whole club went to Liverpool, and they heard the
You'll never walk alone.
Never walk alone.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then the
Goosebumps.
players apparently said to the off field, the executive team, we want something like that for Port Adelaide. Yeah. And that's how Never Tear Us Apart came about. They said, "Oh, can we play with this?" Actually, they and Keith tells this story really well. They started that as a bit of a test case. They said, "Look, we'll do the first game, all 3, and just see how it goes." So it wasn't actually a commitment to say, "Oh, this is going to be the best thing ever." They said, "Well, let's play with it and see how it goes." It ended up being the blueprint now for the last 10 years. It's like part of the DNA of the club, the players, the supporters, and the rest. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
High performance, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Going deep. Saying, what does this look like?
Yeah. It's my mind is ticking because what you're talking about is so all-encompassing and so deep that it's if you can wrap your head around it and put some genuine time and effort into it, which is really tough at the start because there's a lot of work, a lot to look at, it's almost overwhelming. But once you get through that, I think there can be such simple solutions and action with such clear intent that you can make really good, quick change with just avoiding unnecessary mistakes or detours just because you're really actually clear on where you're going and where the low-hanging fruit is and what sort of action you need to take and where it's leading and why you're doing the action in the first place. It's very important, but few people would actually do it, and it just gets me thinking, like, people will only change when it's crisis point rather than by their own accord just really diving in and wanting to do things better. I think it's in our nature that to only want to change when things are really in a bad place. And I think we see it time and time again.
It is, Luke. High performance, that word's used a lot, but really what we're saying there is being at the very top. It is relentless. It's uncomfortable. It's a grind. It feels like there's only moments of, joy, and then you're back at it. But that's it. That's the piece. And there's always a bit of sacrifice. But I haven't met Novak. I'd like to. I'd like to ask, do you enjoy? Like, do you enjoy it? Like, I know that he works hard, and of course he enjoys winning his things. But I'm saying, what about being in that space constantly? Like, is it enjoyable? Like, and I imagine you'd say, look, yeah, probably I've learnt to enjoy it as well. But you're right, getting there at the start is just, there's a lot of energy that goes into getting to that point. As you were talking, I was thinking back to my Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. The first 6 months that I went and started Jiu Jitsu, I was getting beaten up by every other belt. I felt like just, fodder for them.
Yeah, it's very humbling.
Yeah, it is. It's hugely humbling. And then I was like, you know what? I'm starting to understand this stuff now. Now, 12 years later, being a black belt, and then I'll get new white belts coming in, and they're doing the journey that I did 12 years ago. And these guys are physically stronger than me, younger than me by sometimes 20 years, bigger, all that stuff. They're exerting all this energy, and they're seeing me not breaking a sweat. And they're going, this is rubbish. Like, I should be able to dominate you. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what it's given me, is that and that's what it gives. Exactly what you're talking about, Luke. In time, you learn how to be more efficient. You learn how to be in that space and be comfortable with it. So yeah, it's the start, right? It's just getting in, getting started is sometimes the hardest thing to do. And then once we're in it, yes, there's a lot that you have to think about. You don't have to do it all at once either. You can just pick off little bits and pieces and do that bit well, and then do this bit well, and then build it and build it and build it. But you're just in it. You're, pardon the pun, rolling with it all, and you're integrating pieces over time.
Yeah, it makes sense that you've done this work with the strategic work that you've been doing for such a long time, and then also Jiu Jitsu.
Love it.
They go hand in hand. Like it is
Human chess.
it is human chess. It is human origami chess. And high level problem solving with physical consequences.
Yeah. It's the art of folding people's clothes while they're still in them.
Yeah. Literally.
Saw that meme. That was a funny meme.
Yeah, I actually had someone say that to me the other day. I thought it was fantastic. Yeah. That makes sense because, with the type of mind that you have, something really complex and in a complex art form like that, it makes sense that you've gone to the highest level and they go hand in hand. So with your experience in jiu-jitsu, in your experience at the highest level working with businesses and your strategic planning, what are you seeing in tennis? You're now entering into the tennis space and wanting to help businesses, just wanting to help athletes, anything in general. What are you learning about the space and where do you feel there could be impactful change just from the get-go from what you're seeing?
Yeah, another great question, Luke. I think my answer would be depends on what age we're talking about.
Let's give a couple different examples.
Yeah, so if we're starting at it's been great over the last few months. I've been shadowing Joel, obviously, and that's been great. Went to the Playford International and some of the younger ones, and seeing kids at 12 years of age and just how talented they are. It's amazing, right? And so there's clearly a very clear focus on technical development at that age, but also understanding that at some point in time, then that all the other players are starting to catch up technically. Is that fair to say? Like at a certain age, there's not a huge amount that differentiates the technique of players.
Once everyone can hit a ball, it becomes a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, right. So I'm looking at it going, well, if I'm working with a kid who's got a lot of promise at 12, I'm saying, how do we start without overwhelming them, getting the mental side happening right now? Because I'm seeing that as you go on, the difference, but for me, it seems like the difference between the top end players when they're in their early to mid 20s becomes mental, right? So again, look at Novak. He just rebels in that space. Like, is he technically the best in a different range of different areas?
Well, I think he's become the best technically because of his ruthless pursuit of excellence that is completely related to the mindset.
Yeah.
So he never was great at the net, never was great with his hands and his volleys, but he's become elite there. His serve has become elite. He's made all these changes along the journey that I think relate more to the mind than anything else.
Awesome example, right? And look, there's new players that are coming on the scene now, like Sinner and Alcaraz, of course. But Novak and Rog and Nadal were through my era, so I look at that. But there's a great example where you're referencing that Novak recognised technically he was at a point, but it was the mental decision to do that. And then now, he goes into the game and it feels like you're already. I think it seems like players feel like they're already beaten before they go out in the court in a way. So fighting the mental battle with a player like him, particularly a couple of years ago, just felt like overwhelming. So more so in the present, Luke, I think it's that there's obviously a focus on, there seems to be a focus on doing the technical stuff better, of course, you need to. But I'm not sure how much space is dedicated to the mental side of it, where I think that's a huge bit. So for players who are looking at saying, how do I transformationally take my game to the next level? I don't want to just get to the next, I don't want to go from 101 to 100 or 100 to 99. I want to go from 100 to 50. That's transformational change. So with transformational change comes a transformational mindset, and with that becomes all the bits that we're talking about. So how do I unpack that? And that's, I think, the space that I'm seeing there's an opportunity to do more of that. Yeah. There's a bit of courage that comes with that as well, because there's a risk in doing that. You might slip back a little bit, but that's change as well. Sometimes you do have to go backwards to propel yourself further ahead of where you were to begin with. So yeah.
Spot on. Spot on. I think it ties into everything we're talking about around mission, values, preferences, all of that, really unpacking that to make. I don't think you can avoid looking at that if you want to make transformational change. Yeah, I think you're deluding yourself if you want to get to some very high places in a very elite sport like tennis, or for any discipline for that matter. I don't think you can avoid looking at everything you're talking about with a fine-tooth comb.
Isn't it? But that's isn't that a great conversation to have? Is to say, you know, if you're working with a player who's at a certain mark and you're working technically and you might be getting some incremental gains but nothing major, and it's a great chat to come back and say, what are we here? What is this? What are we here to do? Why are you doing this? And not just a passing chat, but a real deep chat like you and I having. Why are we doing this? Because in that, hopefully, might become that motivating factor, the value that says, you know, I remember why I'm doing this, and I've been playing it safe, I reckon. And if I am legit, so one of two things happen. Either I change why I'm doing it and stay safe, or I go, no, I'm doing it for a bigger purpose here. And so I recognise I can't play it safe anymore.
Yeah.
I have to unpack and repack some things up if I'm actually going to do that and take a risk. And you know what? I reckon there's some fulfillment that comes out of that too, Luke. Like, even if you don't make it, at least you can look back and go, well, I recognised at that time that if I was going to go further, which was what was important for me, that I needed to transformationally change. I did it. Maybe it didn't work out. Maybe it did. But you do it in a calculated way, obviously. You don't just say, oh, I'm just going to do this, but you've got to think about, you know, strategise, like we said before, how are we going to do that? So it can be safe as well. It's just the thinking that goes into it.
My mentor always says, like, you need to be soft enough to change, but strong enough not to change all at once. So
Great.
Too much change in a short period of time is completely overwhelming and destabilizing of your character, your personality. It can be to the detriment of you and really put you back. So yeah, you're right. There needs to be some strategy. It needs to be smart, and you need to be backed with good support network and people around you for sure. Yeah,
because you're right. Health as well, mentally, is part of the things that, you know, is the invisible bit. But you know, you need to do exactly what you just said. I agree. There's the core part of you that needs to be stable as well, but thought about in the right way and done in the right way and facilitated and supported. That's what we're talking about here.
For sure. This is like a very big passion of mine, and my intention is to really be part of a culture that embraces this. I find it challenging at times because I'm wired just the way you are, and I want to really move in the direction and talk about the things you're doing and act from that place as much as I possibly can. But taking and helping people along for the journey can be a little bit challenging if they don't want to go there. So it's just really helping create an environment where more people want to do that than not. And it's almost seen as you're the weird one for not taking that journey, rather than you're the weird one for wanting to actually be professional, wanting to actually ask a little bit more out of life and yourself. Which Australian culture can be a little bit like, let's cut you down a bit for wanting a bit more out of yourself and really striving and embracing all parts of yourself and living from that place. So if we can keep doing our best to send the message, then hopefully get more people along for the ride, and the message gets clearer that more people want to be part of that, and then everyone else that doesn't, they're going to find their own environment that is more beneficial to them as well. So absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming down. I could talk to you for hours about this. For sure. And definitely going to look into the Myers-Briggs test and link that in with some of the athletes I think would really benefit from that. And I think be keen to talk to you about that with some of the players that I'm working with as well.
Yeah. Look, you know, for an hour. You're right. We could go on talking. There's just so much in this space, and so maybe if this conversation has got the attention of your listeners and viewers, and there's some topics that they would say, look, can we hear from that in the future? I'm more than happy to come back and talk again, mate. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity. So thank you as well. Yeah.
Amazing. Anywhere to find you online, or anything to plug just to wrap up today?
I've got a light footprint at the moment, mate. I've tried to manage social media. I'm going to loop back in, but yeah, probably the website is the central place, and then it sort of spans out from there. I've got a very light Instagram profile, which I'll be increasing in the new year, but through the website, and if anyone wants to contact me, they can do that as well.
Because you've got your details on there, you've got your email and your phone number, so
Absolutely.
people could just reach out to you directly.
Love to chat with them. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Luke. Appreciate it.